A summons will be issued to her. He will be asked to answer, and she will be given time to present her evidence. This is what due process is all about. And finally, about the 1 year prohibition period. Ang sabi po ng batas, one impeachment only every year. It was not made mention that it should be resolved within the same year. In other words, in our humble opinion, yun pong final namin, or even if we consider the first three impeachment complaints, although hindi naman po ito na-refer ng Office of the Secretary General. If we will be referring to the first three impeachment complaints, the 1 year prohibition will apply until November of 2025. But if we will be referring to the fourth impeachment complaint, which I believe is a consolidation of the three impeachment complaints, the prohibition period will take effect in February of 2026. Yun pong sinasabing 1 year prohibition period. It means 1 year from the date of filing. It does not mean within the year the same was filed. Yes,
Congresswoman,
ma'am?
Congresswoman, I just want to clarify. So, ang nangyari, no, the House decided, no, na instead of sending the first three complaints, impeachment complaints to the Justice Committee, et cetera, that whole process na, because you recognize that there is a time constraint at that time, na paubos na yung session days, the decision was para umabot doon sa time constraint, ay gumawa na lang ng fourth impeachment complaint. Sorry, I'm just clarifying this because it was not clear to us in the beginning, no, na this was in fact how things happened.
That is one of the considerations of the several considerations. Because we have to understand that the only occasion when we can do away the referral to the Justice Committee is if the complaint is supported by 1/3 of the members of the House at least. Yun pong tatlong impeachment complaints na nauna. Wala po siyang endorsement ng 1/3 of the members of the House, which means it needs to be referred to the Justice Committee, which will hold hearing until 60 days to be able to resolve whether the impeachment complaint is resolved or not. Second, ma'am, may observation po tayo that the first complaint is too long. I believe it's 23 articles, while the second and the third are too short. So for us to be able to catch up with the timeline by way of transmitting it through the endorsement of at least 1/3 of the members of the House and to address the either too many articles or too few articles of impeachment as observed in the first three complaints, we came up with a decision, come up with a fourth impeachment complaint, and save the impeachment process from the possible prescription period, and that is 1 year.
Can you
Yes,
shed...
ma'am?
Yeah, gets naman po. Pero another clarification, no, like at which point, how did this timeline rolled out? No? Because the first complaint was filed, I think, December 2. I remember it was my mom's birthday. And then there were basically 2 months. When in that 2 months and the Christmas break, happened, when did the Congress decide na ganito na lang gawin natin para umabot? Kasi medyo mahaba din po yung 2 months.
I recall, ma'am, that prior to the drafting of the fourth complaint, nagkakaroon po ng sariling evaluation ng mga Kongs. May mga meeting ang mga political parties until before the termination or the last session, should I say. Through the intercession of all the political parties in the House, we were able to come up with the 215 signatories endorsing the fourth impeachment complaint. Although prior to that, there is a consensus already to draft the impeachment complaint. And of course, we will be able to confirm that 1/3 signatures of the members of the House only upon signing. And on that occasion, the last session before we took the recess, dun po namin na-confirm that 215 of us are endorsing and supporting the impeachment complaint.
Congresswoman Luistro, I take your points. However, on the other side of it, the petitioners, the other petition, which is being led by Attorney Israelito Torion, says that you are going by technicality. For instance, he says the fourth impeachment complaint, which was signed by 215 House members, as you said, that's already taking action on the three initial complaints, and that you have committed grave abuse of discretion by deliberately delaying the transmittal of the first three complaints. That's the crux of their argument here.
We did not delay, ma'am. We have to understand that Congress is a collegial body. I cannot decide alone. The Good Government Committee cannot decide alone. This is a collegial body that needs the collegial decision. 306 po ang members ng House. As a general rule, we need the majority. And for the purpose of the impeachment case, we need at least one-third. Of course, we have to come up first with our respective evaluation. And then we have to go through our respective political parties meeting until all the political parties come up with their own concession.
You don't believe?
So I
Yeah.
beg to disagree, ma'am, that we delay because since the filing of the first three impeachment complaints, nagkaroon na po ng mga sariling pag-aaral. And we really have to take time before we are able to come up with their collegial decision because of the fact that we are 306 and we need one-third of us to endorse this impeachment complaint.
Okay, Congressman, pag-usapan naman natin yung timeline as far as the Senate is concerned in convening an impeachment as an impeachment court. Sinabi po kanina ni Senate President Cheese Escudero, he doesn't see any significant public clamor for them to convene. Do you agree with that?
With all due respect kay Senate President, no? But andito po tayo sa ground. The House members are in the ground, no? While it is true that the proper way of manifesting their desire for the Senate to convene as an impeachment trial is by writing the Senate President and by way of petition for mandamus, just like the one which is pending already before the Supreme Court. I myself and even the other Kongs can attest that a lot of people in our district are all waiting as to when the Senate will convene as an impeachment court. However, at the end of the day, we always recognize, the Congress or the lower house always recognize the authority of the impeachment court. And of course, that is the Senate of the Philippines, no? To be particular, the 23 senators, no? With all due respect sa ating Senate President, we have a different opinion on the matter.
So as we speak, there are at least two petitions asking the Supreme Court to stop the impeachment proceedings on grounds that the House filed a quote-unquote defective complaint. Do you yourself believe, and you're a lawyer, Congresswoman Luis, or do you believe that the Supreme Court has jurisdiction over this?
Yes, of course. My understanding about that is while as a general rule, we follow the separation of power, kapag mayroong ambiguity, kapag mayroong mga allegations of abuse, we have to apply the principle of checks and balances. And this is one way of applying the principle of checks and balances to make sure that there are no lapses, there are no neglect of duty, there are no grave abuse of discretion. If the Senate decide to convene on June 2 or on a certain date, depending on their discretion. And with respect to the prosecutor, with respect to the impeachment complaint, of course, they have all the right and the discretion to go to the Supreme Court to question whether there's basis to proceed to an impeachment trial, no? Lahat po ng mga available remedies to the Supreme Court, it is my humble opinion. This is part of the principle of checks and balances to make sure that the respective agencies and branches of the government are doing the right thing in as far as addressing the impeachment complaint is concerned.
But I think the Council of Vice President Sara Duterte, who spoke at an impeachment panel this afternoon that I attended, her point being that these petitions need to be decided on before the trial can commence or even the court can convene. Do you think that's the case?
Definitely. As a matter of fact, that is the nature of the issuance of ATRO or temporary restraining order, no? It is my humble submission as well that this petition has to be decided and resolved by the Supreme Court even before we convene the impeachment court. I mean, for the Senate, before they convene the impeachment court.
Right. We're losing your line a little bit, Congresswoman Luister, so I'm going to let you go for now. We'll call you back another time when you have more time to talk with us, but for now, we'll leave that there. Thank you so much for your insights. That was Batangas 2nd District Representative Congresswoman Jervil Luistro.
Thank you and thank you.
And President Bongbong Marcos was the headliner once again at the Alianza para sa Bagong Pilipinas rally over at the Cuneta Astrodome in Pasay City last night. This time around, the president was less fiery but still could not help but take a swipe at former President Duterte.
Pagbigyan niyo po ako at binibilang ko lang yung aming mga kandidato dahil tinitiyak ko na kumpleto at wala pang napasabugan ng granada. Wala po kayo maririnig ng mga ganyan. Yan na po ang kaibahan ng alyansa sa lahat ng mga ibang tumatakbo dito sa halalan na ito. Wala po kayong maririnig na masasamang salita. Wala po kayong maririnig na panakot. Wala po kayong maririnig ng pagmumura.
According to the organizers, some 6,000 supporters attended the event last night, with another 2,000 gathered outside. This is the fourth rally by the administration's coalition, following Lawag, Iloilo City, and Davao del Norte, and this is also the first in Metro Manila. The National Capital Region is always one of the key electoral battlegrounds, what with more than 7 million voters up for grabs. In the 2022 presidential elections, Bongbong Marcos swept all 17 cities and municipalities in Metro Manila, something the Alianza candidates are now hoping to replicate.
Confident ako kasi malakas yung team namin. Kilala kami Metro Manila, alam yung mga nagawa namin. For example, when I became senator in 1992, there were only 4 cities here. Pasay, Manila, Quezon City, and Caloocan. I converted 10 into cities, 10 municipalities, Makati, Mandaluyong, Las Piñas, Parañaque, Valenzuela. Lahat na naging city thereafter, ako nag-sponsor sa Senado para maging city sila. Hindi ako na...
I'd say it's a really good compliment. Merong galing sa executive, merong galing sa legislative, at merong kanya-kanyang experiences that have somehow contributed to Metro Manila.
Interesting. Out in full force. But I wanted to take a second to comment something about what Congresswoman Luistro said earlier. And she's of the belief that the Supreme Court does have jurisdiction over this. But as I was saying, I attended the UP law panel on impeachment this afternoon, wherein some of the panelists, including former Senate President Drilon and former SC spokesman Attorney Ted Te, believe otherwise, which is interesting at how you could look at the same rule and see it differently, right? So, for instance, for Senate President Drilon, and we ran the soundbite, he says they pointed to the fact that this is sui generis nga. It's in a class of its own. So the Senate, therefore, needs to make its own rules. You don't have to abide by what the Constitution says. All the Constitution says at this point is the Senate is the only body that can try and convict an impeached unofficial.
So the gist of this afternoon's panel then, the highlight of it, is it like what everyone has been saying, Reg, when they say the ball is in the Senate's court? Is that really where it is right now?
Well, it's not so simple as that, because it also comes down to, as they pointed out, the current political climate. So, for instance, there was a question of, okay, if the impeached official resigns before a conviction, what happens? Do they have to face the consequences as well? They pointed to the fact that when former President Estrada was impeached back in 2001, I
Yeah,
believe,
2001.
and he resigned, they terminated the proceedings, and Senate President Drilon was sitting in the Senate back then, and he said, we looked around, we noticed the current political climate, we decided it was no longer necessary to continue the trial. You see, so this is where the current environment comes into play, and this is where Senate has to use its own discretion to decide on things. It's not, there is no hard and fast rule. It is not. If you look through the whole Constitution, it's not going to be there. All it will say is that Senate is the only body that can try
And make these
official.
decisions, right?
Exactly, but the rest of it, yeah, it's up to the Senate. But again, it depends also on a lot of
So
other
basically, it's
factors.
really a case-to-case basis. It depends
Yeah.
on so many things: the current environment, the current makeup of Senate,
Yeah.
the inclination of the current
Yeah.
Senate.
Did
And,
they say anything about forthwith?
They did, but
Never-ending
that's the
debate
point
on-
as well. The point is, yes, forthwith means immediately, without delay, and but again, it depends on what the Senate is. But
What
their
their
belief is, yes,
interpretation.
it can carry over from the 19th Congress to the 20th Congress, but the other thing that was interesting was former Ombudsman Conchita Carpio Morales pointing out that the Supreme Court should only really step in when there has been a quote-unquote grave abuse of discretion. So again, who is going to argue at this point that there has been a grave abuse of discretion, right? So if you're going to go by that rule, okay, can the Supreme Court step in or not?
Yeah, it depends. I mean, somebody first has to say that there has indeed
And how,
been
then
grave.
how do you
abuse.
prove grave abuse
Exactly.
of discretion, right? If the Senate calls for a special session and say, well, it says forthwith, we have to commence trial forthwith, then the other camp will say, well, that's a grave abuse of discretion.
We have also heard, like,
that's
what-
I think
yeah.
that was also the point of Senate President Chis
Chis
Escudero.
Escudero.
He's being very careful because he knows whatever they decide will be legally challenged based on various lawyers' interpretation
Interpretations,
of
yeah.
the same law. So I think that's the point. It's like, I have no
Yeah,
answer.
so we have no answers basically, but we have even more interpretations of the law to take into account.
All right, well, for now, we're going to take a quick break. But coming up, the Philippines is filing another diplomatic protest against China, this time over its military helicopters' dangerous flight maneuvers. That story and more next. Keep it here on One News. welcome back. You're still watching the big story here on One News. The Philippines is set to file yet another diplomatic protest against China over the incident yesterday at Bajo de Masinloc or Scarborough Shoal. It happened around 8:30 yesterday morning when a Chinese Navy helicopter with tail number 68 tailed and flew too close to a Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources or BFAR aircraft that was doing a routine monitoring. The Chinese aircraft came as close to just 3 meters away from the BFAR plane, shocking the journalists on board. In a statement, the National Maritime Council said it was deeply disturbed by the unprofessional and reckless maneuvers of the PLA Navy helicopter as it blatantly endangered the safety of the pilots and passengers of the BFAR aircraft. It also showed disregard for international norms on airmanship and flight safety. The United States has also criticized the dangerous maneuvers by the PLA Navy helicopter. In a post on X, U.S. Ambassador to the Philippines, Mary Kay Carlson, called on China to refrain from coercive actions and to settle its disputes peacefully in accordance with international law. As expected, China defended its actions, with their Southern Command saying the BFAR aircraft had illegally intruded into their airspace and severely violated their sovereignty. China calls Bajo de Masinloc Huangyan Dao. Beijing also accused the Philippines of spreading false narratives, to which Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson Commodore J. Tariela took offense.
So, I think this is the most dangerous, no? Dahil ginawa nila ito while our personnel, together with some of our media friends, were actually on board the BFAR aircraft. What I can say is that this level of aggression is pretty much higher compared with the past experiences that we had.
So, a little bit of trivia. 193 diplomatic protests since July 2022 as of December 2024. We're waiting on the numbers from the
2025.
DFA as of today, but we don't have it yet. But that's from July 2022 up to December 2024. So 193 diplomatic
Close to
protests.
200
That is
already.
a lot of diplomatic protests.
This one, though, had really good videos from this interaction. I'm calling it interaction, which is totally an understatement. But 3 meters away, there were a bunch of journalists on board. There were photojournalists. So we did see the pictures and the videos, and we heard the reactions from there. And from a boat to boat, it became plane to boat, and now it's plane to plane or aircraft to aircraft. It was a chopper. And according to the journalists, they came so close. They actually saw
The
the
faces,
passengers of the Chinese helicopter, and they
I think
were
we have
taking
some pictures.
videos.
If we could roll the pictures and the videos for that. They were taken by the journalists on board. Here we're seeing the dangerous maneuvers. And Commodore Tariela said that blatantly violates international aviation regulations. For good reason. You can see how close they came, right? Close enough for you to be able to see the face.
The face.
It's through the window,
Yeah.
as you were saying.
And they were actually able to see what the passengers of this Chinese helicopter were doing. They were also taking videos of the BFAR plane. Clearly, there was a camera. And we saw that in one of the photos posted to the social media account of one of the photojournalists.
That's
who
not
were-
zoomed in. That's just regular,
3 meters, right? 3 meters. And if
Regular
you put that
distance.
into context, I was Googling it. It's like a size of a standard pool table. Or
10
even,
feet.
Yeah, or even like a parking space. So
There you
that's
go.
quite
That's
close.
that's the
that's
closest
very
they
close.
got. See, that was and they tailed the BFAR aircraft for a little while, is what Commodore Tariela was saying. Also, on the port side and above the BFAR aircraft.
It's dangerous because before it was from boat to boat, right? But if it's plane to plane, I mean, you can only imagine the disasters that can come out of a collision of two aircrafts.
Which we
Of course,
saw
the
recently in
aircraft.
Washington, D.C. I mean, things are different there, but you can see how, aircraft are supposed to maintain specific distances
Distance.
from each other.
The other interesting maritime dispute story today was China protesting Vietnam's island building over in the Spratly Islands. Yes, it's China that's protesting Vietnam's island building, not the other way around. They formally protested activities on the Bark Canada Reef. That's according to the Chinese Foreign Ministry, and that reef has been occupied by the Vietnamese since the 1980s. And also, obviously, the whole Spratly Islands is being claimed by the Philippines as well. So there's multiple claimants in that area, but specifically, China's protest today said the reef, the Bark Canada Reef, is part of China's territory. This is according to their foreign ministry spokesperson at their regular briefing today. So it's interesting because China rarely, or at least it doesn't protest Vietnam's activities in disputed waters as much as it does the Philippines. The Philippines has been in their crosshairs, but less so the Vietnamese, with which they have, you know, very strong economic relations. And so the fact that Beijing went ahead and protested the Vietnam's island building activities, I don't know what that means for their relationship.
Well, I do remember over the course of the past year that Vietnam has also been ramping up its island building activities.
Yeah.
I guess people are saying, pundits are saying, you know, they're so busy with the Philippine versus China thing that Vietnam has been
They
there
quickly got
quietly
to work building
Yes.
runways, building military facilities on their islands. But yeah, it's not clear at this point whether this is the start of China protesting more of their activities. But nevertheless, this
It
could
also
be a
is,
chance.
It's also very consistent for China to do that.
For-
I mean, it's also not surprising they're protesting Vietnam, as they should, so we don't feel that we're being singled out.
But also maybe a chance for Vietnam and the Philippines to lead ASEAN negotiations over a code of conduct. I don't know. Maybe that's just wishful thinking, but.
Hey, maybe
It
the
has
code
no-
of conduct will finally move a little bit further.
Other better news, the National Food Authority has started distributing low-cost rice to local government units across the country under the Food Security Emergency Program. The NFA plans to distribute approximately 150,000 metric tons of rice over the next 6 months to address supply concerns. It's being sold at 33 pesos a kilo with a suggested retail price of 35 pesos a kilo for consumers. LGUs such as San Juan and Camarines Sur have agreed to sell at 33 pesos. Now, according to the Department of Agriculture, it's for the LGUs to decide whether to limit the quantity that each consumer purchases. And consumers may also resell the rice as long as it does not exceed 35 pesos a kilo. The DA also admitted that they have received complaints about NFA rice being sold at a Kadiwa stall, but they assured the public that the rice being released is of good quality thanks to stricter quality control measures.
Actually, from initial information that I gathered is pinahold yung selling nun dahil nung pagbukas nga, may nakitang konti, di ba? But then, hindi nga namin alam, iniimbestigahan bakit tinuloy yung benta. It's an isolated incident.
The DA is also seeking an exemption from the COMELEC for the LGUs involved in the distribution of NFA rice. That's to prevent electioneering complaints, what with rice being a political commodity.
Sa Camarines Sur, we already applied for an exemption under the Food Assistance Program.
What we're doing is giving our people the access sa murang bigas. So wala naman hong anumang pamumulitika. And we will try to finish as fast as we can na hindi na siya umabot po sa election period.
Meanwhile, the Department of Transportation has approved the increase in LRT1 fares effective April 2. Single journey tickets will now cost between 20 and 50 pesos, while the maximum fare for stored value tickets will be 52 pesos. According to the Light Rail Manila Corporation President and CEO Enrico Benipayo, this is only the second time in a decade that an increase in their fares was approved. He explained the need for the increase, which is to fund the maintenance and operations of the train line. Meanwhile, the petition to increase jeepney fares by 2 pesos is still under review by the LTFRB. The proposal to raise the minimum jeepney fare to 15 pesos has been pending since 2023, and discussions resumed after a 1 peso provisional increase was approved. The current minimum fare for traditional jeepneys is 13 pesos and 15 pesos for modern jeeps.
We're going to be pausing for another quick break, but right after that, Pope Francis remains in hospital and is now battling double pneumonia. The latest on his condition and more after this. Keep it here on One News. Thanks for sticking around with us here on The Big Story.
Okay, let's circle back to what we were just talking about, Chinese recent dangerous maneuvers off of Bajo de Masinloc. Joining us now on the show is Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson for the West Philippine Sea, Commodore J. Tariela. Commodore, good evening. Thanks for squeezing us in. I know you're busy tonight.
Thank you for having me, and a pleasant evening to your viewers.
Okay, Commodore, the recent incident, actually it was just yesterday when the Chinese Navy helicopter came too close to the B-4 aircraft. First of all, were you on board, and also how many times did the incident happen?
Unfortunately, Regina, I was not on board because I attended
Oh, that's right, the hearing.
congressional hearing yesterday. So those who were on board are only some of the photo journalists and some of the members from the Philippine Coast Guard and the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources.
Do we know how many times the Navy helicopter came, a little too close to the B-4 aircraft? Was it just once? Because we saw the video, we played it, but it looks like from that video it was just once. But was it repeated?
Actually, the PLA Navy helicopter somewhat shadowed the aircraft for almost 40 minutes while above the territorial airspace of Bajo de Masinloc. And there are only two instances that they conducted dangerous maneuver. The first one was the one that we showed on my X post, the one that came close as near as 3 meters. And the other instance was the distance of 10 meters also on the port side, meaning on the left side of the aircraft.
Give us an idea, Commodore, no? Has this been happening? Because earlier we were chatting over here, and it seems to have been escalating, at least from where we stand. So we are not in the West Philippine Sea. We do not go on these trips. But in the beginning, di ba, boat to boat. Tapos nagkaroon nung, when our researchers from UP Marine Institute were there in the case, nagkaroon ng chopper to boat, right? And then now it seems to be aircraft to aircraft. Would you agree that this is a kind of an escalation, so somewhat?
Well, this is considerably the most dangerous action of the PLA Navy helicopter. Because last year, what they did to this B-4 aircraft was they only used flares, right? And just like what you mentioned a while ago, last month, while the marine scientists of B4 was also on in Pag-asa case, they used PLA Navy helicopter over the small rubber boat. So, but for us, we still, regardless of how the level of or scale of aggression that they're doing, this is outright illegal and unlawful. But we don't want to interpret this that China really wants to escalate the tension to the next level. We can assume that probably this is the only recourse that they have for them to discourage the B-4 aircraft to carry out an MDA patrol over the territorial airspace of Bajo de Masinloc.
What makes it even scarier is, unlike ships, there is no way for the pilots to communicate directly with each other, right? So take us there, Commodore. Give us a sense of how dangerous it was for the pilot at that time.
Well, I think the hardest part for the pilot is that he doesn't really know how the PLA Navy helicopter will approach towards his aircraft. So even if he wants to keep away from the chopper, he cannot anticipate whether the chopper will go above the aircraft or go below him or even, get closer on the left side. So I think that's the greatest challenge for the B-4 pilot on how he can be able to ensure the safety passage of the aircraft while the helicopter continuously harassing them.
Right. So in a case like that, what is the safest thing to do? Is it for him to just cruise along at the same altitude or to move away?
Well, based on my conversation with the pilot yesterday, he said since you cannot anticipate where the chopper is going or how crazy the Chinese PLA Navy pilot will go, whether above or below you. You just have to continue the flight direction where you're heading.
So
Well-
stick to the flight path, basically.
Well,
Yeah.
Commodore, you did call it the most dangerous act by China because it could have led to a disaster. But moving forward, Commodore, ano po ba yung mga plano ng Philippine government or the National Task Force for the West Philippine Sea to ensure the safety of our troops moving forward?
Well, for the National Task Force West Philippine Sea, particularly the Philippine Coast Guard and the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources, the concern of the Chinese government has always been to discourage the government forces, particularly Coast Guard and BFR, in carrying out maritime patrol, whether at sea or up air. No? So, in particular in Bajo de Masinloc, last January 4, the Chinese Coast Guard deployed its biggest monster ship, also to scare away not just the Filipino fishermen, but even the Philippine Coast Guard in for us to be discouraged in patrolling as well. But despite of all this level of aggression and threat and force projection of the Chinese Coast Guard and even the unlawful activities of the PLA Navy helicopter, nothing will change. The Philippine Coast Guard will still carry out maritime patrol in our exclusive economic zone in Zambales. The BFAR will still carry out MDA flight and also sovereignty patrols. So nothing will be changed because of all this unlawful activities of the Chinese government.
Commodore, I'm just curious, no? Is obviously that helicopter from China, that's a PLA Navy helicopter. For us, it's a kind of a civilian aircraft. It's from the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources. As our pilot, he or she is not a military pilot, not a military trained pilot.
Yes, the pilot for the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources is not a military pilot. He is just a civilian pilot.
Okay, and would we maybe consider having our pilots trained extra in case they're faced with this? Because my understanding, at least, is it's of course easier to maneuver a helicopter as compared to an airplane, which is what our people were on and our journalists were on. And is there any plan to tweak like a training for pilots, or do we just carry on as we were?
Well, that can be a possibility, but again, in ensuring the safety of our passengers and our public aircraft, we always ensure for the Coast Guard and BFAR that the pilots that we will be utilizing in this kind of dangerous patrol in Bajo de Masinloc or in any parts of the West Philippine Sea that we consider to have high escalatory response with China. We always look at our ace pilots. The same thing like we look at experienced keepers for our Coast Guard vessels, because we need to make sure that they have the experience and competency to prevent such accident once the Chinese Coast Guard vessels or the PLA Navy helicopters are going to come up with unlawful activities.
As expected, Commodore, Beijing has hit right back, saying it was the Philippines that illegally invaded the airspace of China, and it went on to say that our naval and air forces legally tracked, monitored, and warned the aircraft to leave. Is that accurate? They warned
First
the
of all,
aircraft?
the Chinese government does not have jurisdiction or sovereignty over the waters in Bajo de Masinloc. This was already clearly stipulated with the Philippine Maritime Zones Act that the territorial airspace of Bajo de Masinloc, because we have sovereignty over its territorial waters, belongs to the Philippines. So the claim of China that they have jurisdiction over these waters is actually not legal, or that they do not have basis. They're always good in denying their unlawful activities, but regardless as to whether they have jurisdiction or not, the mere fact that what they did is a violation of international regulations and it endangered the Filipino people and the crew of our aircraft is something that should be criticized and called out.
Commodore, I'm just curious, right? We've talked about this, and the last time we spoke to you, it was about the monster ship coming close to the coastline of Zambales. But for the rest of, our EEZ, the West Philippine Sea, how have things been? Do we still observe like like a big increase in the number of Chinese patrol boats, militia boats, etc.? Do we see a lot of flybys now? How are things in general over the rest of the area?
Well, to be honest with you, I would say that the Chinese government, particularly in 2024, have significantly increased their level of aggression. For example, in 2023, we only saw China Coast Guard vessels carrying out dangerous maneuvers and using water cannon. The year 2024 was completely different. In 2024, we experienced a direct jet stream water cannon attack that even damaged the resupply boats of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. We also experienced a high-speed ramming, wherein the China Coast Guard vessel never hesitated to ram a Coast Guard vessel in its Koda Shoal, also in Bajo de Masinloc. So this happened also for 3 times last year. So and of course the June 17 incident also happened last year. We can say that the Chinese Coast Guard in 2024's response is entirely different with that of the 2023. We can fairly say that the level of aggression has increased compared with 2023 since we started the Transparency Initiative. If you're going to ask me why such behavior happened, I think we can argue that the reason why the Chinese government are doing this, it's because they are responding with our transparency in a way that they want to stop the Philippine government in carrying out transparency efforts. Because for 2 reasons. One, uh, obviously, there is so much reputational damage that has been incurring with China every time we do this kind of exposure of their unlawful and bullying activities in the West Philippine Sea. Secondly, I would argue that the main objective of the Chinese government, why they have elevated their aggression, is to discourage our neighbors, particularly Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia, to adopt the same strategy of exposing Chinese aggression. Because how can you respond with this kind of action if all of the Southeast Asian countries are going to tell the world about their aggression?
Well,
It
Commodore,
is not actually accurate to say that it's only the Philippines that are experiencing, incursion or illegal presence
Yeah.
of the Chinese Coast Guard. The
well,
same thing with Indonesia.
Yeah.
Ray Powell, AMTI, Greg Pauling, has been publishing
Yeah.
also enough evidence to say that the illegal patrol of the Chinese Coast Guard vessels
Right.
are also happening in Natuna Island for Indonesia,
Right.
Lacuna Shoals
Yeah.
for Malaysia, and even Vanguard
Yeah.
Bank for and the Paracel Island
Yeah.
in Vietnam.
Yeah.
So the only difference is that we are the one telling the world what is happening,
Right.
and that China is a blatant violator of the international law.
Right. Right.
all right, Commodore, just before we go, we only have a few minutes left. Just wanted to get your thoughts. We've already filed close to 200 diplomatic protests since 2022. But as you mentioned, China's behavior has still escalated. Now, you did describe it as the most dangerous act, this latest incident. How important are diplomatic protests at this point?
Well, the Department of Foreign Affairs have explained this a lot of times because the reporters keep on asking about it. And I would just like to reiterate the position of the Department of Foreign Affairs. As a sovereign state, it's important for us to file this diplomatic protest, for us to tell China and the international community that we do not condone, we are against such unlawful activities, and that we are expressing our dissent with such unlawful activities.
Right.
This kind of diplomatic protest is very important because if we're not going to do that, it would appear like we are just allowing them to keep on violating the international law or to keep on violating and disrespecting our sovereignty and sovereign rights.
Right. All fair points. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. We didn't even have time to talk about the House hearing yesterday. We'll save that for the next guesting. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Philippine Coast Guard spokesperson for the West Philippine Sea, Commodore J. Tariela.
Okay, last bit before we say goodbye, our big picture for tonight is a sign that is giving hope to many Catholics around the world. This is what appeared Tuesday over the hospital room where Pope Francis is being treated for double pneumonia. A rainbow burst through the clouds just as international camera operators and photographers trained their lenses on the 10th floor of Rome's Gemelli Hospital. The media then was waiting for word about the ailing 88-year-old pontiff who has been in hospital for almost 1 week now due to what the Vatican calls a complex condition. Since Francis's hospitalization, papal audiences have been canceled and events were delegated to other church leaders. These cancellations have put a damper on upcoming activities for the once every quarter-century celebration of the Jubilee year.
The Jubilee is very important to all Catholics
Yes.
around the world, of course, many of whom are traveling to Italy for the celebration. So
It's jam-packed with activities, actually. I was in Fatima, and they were, which is not even in Rome, but they were really gearing up and
it's huge on
preparing.
the
Yeah, it's
Catholic
really huge.
calendar. So here's hoping Pope Francis pulls through.
Well, they did say he was in good spirits.
Yes, and
he's-
he ate.
And he ate.
So that's
It's always a good sign. Right, on that note, that's it for the big story tonight.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.
Thanks for tuning in. Have a good night.
Well, do stay tuned because coming up next is Play-by-Play with Andre Felix and Denise Tan. What's up, guys?
Good evening. Wala naman.
Hindi ka makapagpatawa
Ha?
kasi
Kasi
napakaseryoso.
ano,
Well, yun nga,
Somber
kasi
note.
syempre you ended with Pope Francis, of
Yeah,
course.
so, you know,
diba?
joking
That's
about
why I said
religion,
good
yeah?
evening. And
And no joking about double pneumonia.
of course, yes. But a great show. Once again, I was tuning in. I was actually just listening, watching.
Yeah, right.
And yes, I was. Kasi
No, we
magagamit.
noticed you walking in at like 8:28.
Nanonood kami sa labas.
Lag.
Sa labas.
Then, binoking pa eh. No?
But thank you once again to the ladies of the big story. Abangan nyo mamaya dahil volleyball kami.
Yay!
Si Denise Tan ang mag-highlights mamaya.
Very nice.
Hindi,
Siyempre.
maraming highlights ngayon. Sobrang dami nagyari.
Yes.
Di ba yung Gilas, busy din, may friendly.
Altang nagbabasa ka.
Nakita ko sa TV kanina. Kaninang
Lulusot ka pa.
lunchtime.
Okay,
Thank you
tell
once
us about
again to
it.
Sean, to Regina, and to Pauline. We've got Gilas Pilipinas, as Sean mentioned, getting ready to face Chinese Taipei in the FIBA Asia Cup qualifiers, plus rewards for the national curling team for their historic gold in the Asian Winter Games.
And we've got updates from the UAP Season 87 men's and women's volleyball tournaments, including a huge setback for the Ateneo Blue Eagles.
And don't forget, Denise Tan will be doing the highlights later on. Stick around for that. I'm Andre